Hi everyone, I want to let my friends and family know that Caesar and I are still safe and well. We are still in Costa Rica, still in Pavones, surfing the world's second longest left-hand point break, and it is awesome. It is living up to its name. It's fantastic. But this week I wanted to, I've been debating whether or not to say anything about this on this channel for a while, but I feel it's actually kind of important, and I really want to talk about MIQ. This is affecting so many thousands of New Zealanders overseas. Our country has effectively shut its borders to us. If we want to go back home, we can't just get on a plane and go back home. We have to have a spot, a managed isolation quarantine booked. To book a spot in MIQ, we need to create an account on a government website, enter our passport details. Only citizens and residents are allowed to return. And then once a week, nearly every week, not every week, sometimes they don't do it, but once a week they release about 2,000 to maybe 3,000 rooms. In order to get one of these rooms booked for your stay, your return, you need to enter, first of all, at a specified date and time, a virtual lobby, and that opens an hour before the queue starts. So after the lobby closes, if you're in it, you are assigned randomly a place in the queue. The first person in the queue gets into the booking system and is able to book their room for their return, for them to isolate for 14 days in a government-run hotel guarded by the army. If you're too far back in the queue, you miss out. The next room release, your place in the queue last week, doesn't matter. You are again randomly assigned a place in the queue. So it's essentially a lottery to re-enter your country. We're made to do a lottery every week to try and get back home. There are thousands of Kiwis stuck overseas. Many of them, their visas have run out. They've run out of money. They're couch surfing. They're at risk of deportation. They apply for emergency spots in MIQ and are routinely denied in those circumstances particularly, which seems absolutely cruel and unfair. Yet, if you can play rugby, if you're an All Black, you can leave the country and have your spot in MIQ booked for your return. Rhythm and Vines is going to go ahead, apparently, in summer. All of those overseas entertainers, they will have their spots booked for them. The government sets aside spots for sports people and entertainers, while its citizens are locked out. So I wanted to talk about this because it's obviously deeply unfair, especially now that COVID in the form of Delta has arrived in New Zealand and is spreading at a rate of over 100 cases a day. With the spread of Delta, the government has decided that New Zealanders within the country who actually do have COVID can isolate at home. Whereas New Zealand citizens wanting to return to their country, who are, most of us, double vaccinated and repeatedly test negative for COVID, we're not trusted to isolate at home. We have to book a spot in MIQ. The number of spots available for returning citizens has decreased because the government is not always letting citizens in the country self-isolate if they have COVID. They've taken some of the MIQ hotels out of the system for returnees, and that's isolating people in the community who have tested positive for COVID and who can't isolate at home. Guarded by the army. There have been a few escapes, chased down by the army. So it's all deeply unfair, and now Delta is spreading in New Zealand. It doesn't make any sense. If you're going to allow New Zealanders with COVID to self-isolate, why don't you allow people without COVID to self-isolate? It's like you don't trust us? It's like they don't want us to return? Indeed, this is the other bit that bothers me almost equally. The widespread support from citizens in New Zealand for the closed border. It breaks my heart. If I ever return to New Zealand, how am I going to have conversations with people who thought it was okay for me to be locked out of my country for months on end? How can I go back to a country that treats me like that? My countrymen's support of this policy has It's traumatising. I don't feel like I'm a citizen of New Zealand anymore. So I'm luckily not one of the very unlucky people who got stuck and was travelling and couldn't get home. There are some people whose flights were cancelled repeatedly and they couldn't get home and they got stuck overseas. I'm not one of those. I have residency in Panama. Panama has treated me well. Panama has done a good job with their vaccinations. Thanks to Panama, I'm fully vaccinated. And thanks to Panama, I'm safe. And thanks to Caesar and I being very careful and wearing N95 masks and the hand washing and all of that stuff, which is just so routine for us now. I know when they introduced MIQ in New Zealand back in March, April, I think they had it up by like April, May 2020. At the time, I supported it. I thought, yeah, that's obvious, that's a good idea. You had your lockdown, it was what, 6 weeks? You managed to beat COVID, you locked it out. And the primary method or the primary point at which COVID was kept out of the country was the border. It was the border, the locked border kept, after your 6-week lockdown, it was that border for many, many months that kept you guys COVID free. And because it was the border that kept you guys safe for so long, closing the border, the people who bore the brunt of that policy were the people who were on the wrong side of it, those of us who were outside. It was our right of return removed and managed at a very small trickle so that you guys could stay safe and COVID free. And so I liken that to an equivalent scenario of there's a zombie apocalypse and you guys are in the safe haven and we were out there checking it out over there. The zombies come. You shut the doors, and you're only going to let a couple in every now and then, and the rest of us, we're out there right in the thick of a zombie apocalypse trying to survive. I've lived deep in the thick of a pandemic and done a really good job surviving, so thanks to Panama's, not always great, but pretty good management of it. So for us to bear the brunt of that policy, to keep the people inside New Zealand safe, and then have vitriol directed against us and horrible things said about us, can you see how we're all very upset about this? I mean, I don't think it takes a great degree of imagination to understand our predicament. And I'm thankful and happy that my family are well, and particularly my elderly family are well and alive and safe. And now you're all vaccinated. But while I supported it at the beginning, and it was a good idea at the beginning, I remember thinking, well, you know, it's got to be like the limitations and the harshness of it. That's because it's a new system and it'll change and they'll work out a way to allow New Zealanders to see their families in maybe, a few months' time, at least a year. No, we're 21 months into the pandemic and MIQ hasn't changed much at all, except for the amount of rooms available for returning New Zealanders getting less, not more, they're getting less. I think it's that complete lack of urgency and that huge support for locking people out for months on end that just, it's traumatic. I can't agree with it. And if I come back and people tell me things like, oh, you should have come home earlier, or you should have, you know, that's the risk you take when you go travelling. No, it isn't. You do not buy a ticket to go overseas thinking, what if a global pandemic happens and I get stuck in Central America, can't see my family? What if I can't get home to my son if something goes wrong for him? My entire lifetime, none of you thought that when you bought plane tickets, so don't pretend that I should have known what was going to happen. I feel like many New Zealanders see me as less than full citizen now because I'm overseas. But New Zealand is the only country in which I have citizenship. It's the country in which I was born and lived for 51 years of my life. This experience of being locked out of my country, the reason why it's so important to me to not be locked out of my country is, what if something happens to my son, who I haven't seen since January 2020, and it breaks my heart every day because I miss him so much. His mental health isn't always the best. What if he needs me? When I left, the circumstances under which I left, I was 3 days away. If he needed me, I could be on a plane and be with him in 3 days. I have no idea when I will see him again. The New Zealand government says there will be home isolation by the end of the first quarter of next year. I mean, if your vaccination rates are over 90%, why you have isolation anymore, I don't know. We're not doing that overseas. There are new treatments for COVID that reduce hospitalisation death rates by over 80%. We have vaccines readily and freely available in most parts of the world that New Zealanders are in and within New Zealand. I see the behaviour of New Zealand today, and it reminds me very much of the panic in Panama when I was there in March, April, May 2020. You guys are behaving the same way, so I get it, it's scary. But what you don't get to do is strip citizens overseas of their rights and then direct vitriol at us for it. We've been called plague rats, traitors, entitled, whingers. It's just, I think the vitriol directed against us is just as hurtful as the government's policy of that cruel weekly lottery to try and win a spot to go home. I will never forgive my country for treating us like this. I have no sense of allegiance to New Zealand anymore, and I cannot speak to other people proudly of my country after the way it's treated its citizens overseas for so long. But I am safe, I am well, I have residency in Panama, which is my new home, and I thank Panama again so very much for looking after me, but I just want to see my son. So yeah, I'll just go surfing. I'll just surf. I know they mean well, but why do guys keep giving me unsolicited advice on surfing? Do I look like I don't know what I'm doing? I mean, it's only mildly annoying and slightly amusing, but here we are. It happens, like I get unsolicited surfing advice once or twice a month. And the funny thing is, then I watch some of these guys surf and I'm actually better than they are, so why are they I swear it's because I'm a woman. Man, that was a long wave. I need to be walking my board though. Got a new fin, check this out. Giant fin. More stability when I'm trying to walk on the board.